Okay, remember that they're changing my voice. So this is part 2 on why conservatism has failed. Now keep in mind, I know that there's a lot of people who are English and otherwise who are very polite. You know, you might say they're considerate. And that's a more complicated philosophical idea when we look at it in terms of considerate in reality versus in the construct. But to some degree, I'm sure they feel some type of way about not wanting to harm people and things of this nature. Okay. Whatever is the truth is what I believe. Whatever the righteous man would think is what I think. And what the righteous man would say is what I've been saying. It's also important to note that multiculturalism, in the sense of them not receiving me as Christ, right? Multiculturalism as an idea in that sense has failed. There's one culture, that's God's culture. Okay, in the sense that you can have your own subculture, right? Maybe you like to garden, maybe you like to surf, or fly kites, or whatever you do. Okay, those things have their own cultures associated with it. And maybe you have your own racial traditions, If you were to obey God to me, maybe you still meet up with, your indigenous group or whatever. But in the sense of multiculturalism as we have it now, in the sense that they've refused to accept me as Christ because of the conservative elite controlling what cultures are here and what cultures aren't. In that sense, it has failed. But that's not what Peter Whittle, whose last name appears to be like a pen name, maybe he changed his name, maybe he didn't, but for whatever reason, it's a play on words for let white. So they're saying let white, quote unquote, Peter, which goes back to the idea of the foundation of the church fathers. They're basically saying that they want people to play stupid and to choose the white man's order, something that I do not have an option to do because I have to put God first. If it was black people, I'd say the same thing. If it's people in my family saying, hey, we're in your family, what about us? I'd tell them the same thing. Okay, it'd be a little harder to tell them because they're a little more deserving than most people, if not all other people. But I would still tell them I cannot do that. I have to put God first and accept the consequences. I'm somebody willing to be crucified for God Almighty. I'm somebody willing to be tortured forever for the one true God if that's what I had to do. I'm unconditionally loyal to God. I might say, man, why does it have to come to that? But I'm unconditionally loyal to God. And that is in the case of being tortured forever. Obviously, it's not going to happen to me because I put God first. Now let's wrap this up here. So point number 10. Historically, conservative cultures have tried to confuse people about the nature of reality. And as a result, they promote rape by deception and live it by default. Okay, so rape by deception is when people are being deceived into having sex in a way that they otherwise wouldn't. So they promote organized rape by coercion, deception, misdirection, psychology-based rape, right? Using the various tactics that we see the devil, who's a deceiver, use. The deceiver, the adversary, what have you. Point number 11. The government, and keep in mind that Lucifer, right, he tries to bear his own light. So he tries to make you look at things in a certain light from a certain perspective. That's why they kept telling me to change my perspective, because they're Luciferians and they want me to look at it their way and they want to pretend that they're important. And again, people have told them, one person particularly, me as well, we have told them that it's not that hard, okay? If they're going to rebel against God, at least work around me. Don't persecute me. Obviously, you shouldn't rebel against God, but that's the least you can do. And they didn't listen. Point number 11, the governments have failed their citizens, especially minorities. The governments are run by corporations, which are basically all culturally conservative organizations. Their values are derived from greed and lunacy. So even if they, support climate change initiatives, even if they support LGBT rights, that's not the same as being a liberal. Those are just things that are part of what the Western elite historically is. Think about Greece, all the gays in Greece, in ancient Rome. And in ancient Rome, They had a certain culture where some of the people you might say leaned left in the Senate, and some of the people you might say leaned right. It's just the evolution. Now, they're conserving that same Western cultural paradigm. To be a liberal, you have to be open to reality and to sense and reason, and not just insist on being a quote-unquote liberal in the psychological construct, which is not being a liberal at all, but being a conservative who's adverse to the change of making a system that's actually fair, just, and right. Point number 12. Most people consider Chinese and Japanese culture superior to English culture. No offense to the English, but as the story goes, they do better in school. Hitler is said to have praised some Asian culture, I think it was Japanese culture, and he said that they were superior to the Aryans, and I've come across some videos that made that claim. I haven't seen it written in Mein Kampf or some, and I never read Mein Kampf, but as the story goes, that's what he is said to have done. Okay, so point number 13. In America and the UK, Asians that maintain their Asian culture get better grades than whites in white culture. Therefore, Peter Whittle is unwittingly or otherwise arguing that he should tell Asians that white people are smarter than they are, and that they need to get rid of their culture, as he believes that their cultures are inferior. Also, keep in mind that intelligence has various forms. Now, do I think that Asians are smarter than everyone else? No. Do I think that they're quite often very book smart and they, get good grades and get into colleges at a much higher rate than basically every group except for maybe Africans from Africa, Nigerians from Nigeria, for example. Except for Nigerians from Nigeria, that is. Probably yes. They might even get in at a higher rates than Nigerians from Nigeria these days. So it's probably about neck and neck. Okay. Now, and I would say to those Asians, just like I say those Nigerians from Nigeria, just because you get good grades doesn't mean you're smarter than other people. Right? Wisdom calls out to and is lived by the smartest people, who are all smart enough to be persecuted for righteousness' sake. All who wish to live a godly life in Christ Jesus will be persecuted. That's an important distinction to make. If you have any questions, put in the comments. That might make it a little confusing here. But using the scale of the conservative, who often points to what you might say are academic achievements, scientific achievements, what have you. Okay, white people have been shown up by Asians. So is it not kind of holding back progress using their own scale when they say that Asians should change their cultures to assimilate to English culture? Right? It's stupid. So the Asians must be those particular Asians who make it to these countries and who score highly must be doing something more right than the average person in the white cultures of England and France and America and the other Western cultures, and Russia for that matter, so on and so forth. It's pretty straightforward. So almost immediately you see that his argument doesn't hold any weight, because his argument is based in there's a threat to their well-being and therefore people should assimilate. It's based in people trust each other less because they're from different cultures, and they trust people in their own culture less when they come to England, and therefore magically they should assimilate to the neo-colonial culture that dominates England and the cultures that their neo-colonial kleptocratic governing class allow, which is an absurdity. That argument is way out there. Point number 14. If the racist conservatives do not have any opportunities for people of color, should the LGBT community say that they must conform to LGBT culture? So in other words, if you're a Hispanic gentleman coming from some Hispanic place, like most of these immigrants who come across the border are, and you're just trying to find a job, and they say, hey, you got to change your culture. And the conservatives say, well, we don't really like you, or there's no jobs here for you, or there's no place for you. And the LGBT people say, hey, the only place for you is here. Should they then be forced to be gay or bisexual and to come into their culture in order just to survive? Because people like Peter Whittle don't want to give up their conservative leanings? And is that not, their conservative tendencies and arguments, the radical conservative arguments, mind you? And we find them also on the left, because the mainstream paradigm, right, is basically a conservative paradigm. It's conservatives who lean toward liberal, if that, and conservatives who are clear-cut conservatives, or something to that effect, okay, make up both the left and the right on the left-right paradigm. And their white, Jew, and LGBT people are conserving their power and their Greek cultures, which a lot of people are confused about because they have to do with behind-the-scenes activities like Greek fraternities do, the mystery schools, the cults, the secret societies, the social clubs, what have you. And there's an abundance of evidence. You want to argue about that? Anytime you want to debate about that, I'm more than willing. I have a bunch of facts, bottom line facts. The empirical evidence makes it clear that it is insane to think I'm wrong about that. Insane. So what kind of poorly bred monsters believe that their nation should be a modern-day slave market? Because that's what you're doing. It's a modern-day slave market. You're saying it to the poor people of every race in this country and the middle class who are becoming poorer and poorer every day, that they better conform and that other cultures won't be tolerated, and that you'll use the masses of various people in the networks of the governing class and their managerial class and otherwise to make sure that they do it, to make sure they do what they're told. Okay. Point number 15. The essence of Western conservatism is conserving the behind-the-scenes elitist trickle-down culture that dominates the West. Both Democrats and Republicans are doing that, and so are libertarians. Point number 16, my last point for the first two parts of this series. I'll probably be making more parts in the future if I remember. The statement, "Give me liberty or give me death," is supposed to present and represent the idea that freedoms in a secular system are not negotiable, and death is preferred to giving them up. Thank you.